In this video, we're going to understand the connections and implications between the BaGua, the I Ching binary code, and DNA. Now, in these four things, you'll see that some are relatively ancient, meaning the BaGua and the I Ching, and some are relatively new and modern, meaning the binary code and DNA. So at first glance, these things may not seem very related. They may not really seem that important or even worth study or a second thought. And what we're going to do in this presentation is learn the connections and implications between these things, why this is important, and how this can be impactful in our lives. Because there's really no part of our life that is not touched by binary code, meaning computers, computer languaging, computer programming, and also the work of genetics and epigenetics and understanding DNA. So getting into the foundations of all of these things that we're talking about, we can see on the left-hand side we have the Tai Chi symbol, which is the yang and the yin symbol, which is an ancient Chinese symbol, a Chinese talisman that I'm sure you've seen plenty of times. And on the right-hand side we see a minus and a plus, which if you've had any sort of mainstream education, you've seen these because they're basic mathematical operators. And then below that we see 0 and 1. Now really what we're looking at are things that on the surface seem separate, but are in actuality quite interrelated and potentially even one in the same thing. Meaning one way was perhaps one way of explaining it and translating it, and another way is perhaps a more modern, more up-to-date way of translating it. So on the left-hand side we see the Tai Chi symbol. Yes, we see yang and yin. And what most people don't ever really notice or think about is the black circle which encases both of those symbols. Likewise, we can see the oppositional or the complementary dots within each color, meaning the black dot in the white circle and the white dot in the black circle. These are two subtleties that need to be looked at, and we should ask ourselves, well, what are they really getting at? What does that really mean? What does it really mean that the yang and the yin are actually encompassed in the same circle, and that each contains the opposite? Because most people have sort of a generic understanding of like, oh yeah, duh, I mean light and dark, hot and cold, duh, these are opposites, who cares? Then they see the symbol and they just think, oh yeah, that's what it is, who cares? And they sort of just stay at this elementary level of understanding. What they don't understand is these two little subtleties and really look at those things. And then at the bottom we can see the physicist Niels Bohr, which was one of the fathers or foundational figures in quantum physics, quantum mechanics. When he was given the opportunity to create a family coat of arms, he chose this symbol. And he chose the phrase to go along with it, being opposites are complementary. Not opposites are oppositional, or opposites are at war with each other or trying to get rid of each other. No, opposites are complementary. So perhaps we could look at that and ask ourselves, what does that really mean about this yang and yin symbol? What does this really mean about positive and negative, and 0 and 1? Now getting into something a little bit more modern, we can look at Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, which was basically, in short, if it weren't for this guy, we probably wouldn't have computers and technology, because he more or less put together binary logic, which is this idea of ones and zeros, positive and negative, which he was inspired by this realization, or he came to this realization through his inspiration of studying the I Ching. Because he was basically working on this theory, working on this idea, and then never really found any evidence for it and was just sort of frustrated by it. And then somehow the I Ching came into his hands, and he read it and he saw, oh wait, this is all based on yin and yang. This is all based on binary. This is all based on zeros and ones. Oh, maybe there's something to this. And then he really worked on his ideas, but couldn't actually find any purpose for them. So he basically died in 1776. And his ideas really didn't do much until George Boole came along and really brought his ideas up to date. Which George Boole is really the progenitor of Boolean logic, which is also what computers are based on in a lot of algebraic and mathematical things. So already we're seeing interconnections between this yang-yin symbol and the I Ching, and zeros and ones and positive and negatives with modern technology, with computers which have completely changed the planet, completely changed human consciousness. So getting back to the I Ching and sort of getting more precise in our interconnection understanding of this interconnection, we can use the simple binary system, which binary basically just means bi as in two, nary, two-number system. And really what that's based on is 0 and 1. Computers operate on 0 and 1. They operate on binary logic. So we can look at that, okay, 0 and 1. But then if we get into the I Ching and the yin-yang symbol, we can see that they too have their own version of binary logic, meaning yin and yang, 0 and 1, which they translate as broken and unbroken. So we can take that further and understand that in English the name for 0 is 0, the name for 1 is 1. In BaGua or the I Ching, the number or symbol for 0 is yin, and the symbol for 1 is yang, which we can see yin being the broken line and yang being the unbroken line. So already we're seeing the connections between Boolean logic, or binary number system, and even Boolean logic, and the I Ching. Because the I Ching is based on these broken and unbroken lines, or 0 and 1, or yin and yang, depending on how you want to look at it. So with binary digits, we can get 4 possible combinations: 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. Also, with the I Ching, we can get 4 basic combinations, because we have broken, broken, unbroken, and broken, broken, unbroken, and then unbroken, unbroken, which is the same translation for the Boolean logic here. But also we need to point out that the binary numbers are read left to right, but the BaGua numbers are read bottom to top. So if you read the bottom to top, it'll make a lot more sense. And even if you've used the I Ching, if you've read hexagrams, you've looked at trigrams, you know that, okay, you start from bottom and go to the top. So taking it further and getting into the BaGua, because Ba basically means 8, because we can see that, well, okay, we have octal numbers, which means an octave or something, which means 8, and then Ba, which means 8, BaGua, 8 guas, or the symbols over here on the left is technically a gua, or really a kind of digital form of the original binary combinations. Because once we take the original binary digits, we can sort of translate that into something that's more decimal or something that's more digital and represent it in a myriad of different ways, which you can see at the top. If we add the digit, we get three things across, and then below that we can translate that to 0 through 7 or 1 through 8, which is again what we would call octal numbers, or the I Ching calls BaGua. And then for our chart over here on the right, we can see again the connection between the 8 gua, or the 8 trigrams, which make up the BaGua, because they're just different combinations of binary numbers or digital numbers, depending on how you want to extrapolate that out. And then taking that further, how that relates to the I Ching, because the I Ching is 64 hexagrams. Well, if we have 8 gua over here on the right, or 8 trigrams, 8 times 8 is 64. And we can see on this chart, again, that we have the lower hexagram on the left and the upper hexagram on the top and kind of more on the right. Then we can see that with the chart, we can find our combination, because if you have 8 times 8, again, that is 64. So you can see how we started with simple binary numbers or binary logic, on, off, positive, negative, yes, no, unbroken, broken, male, female, hot, cold, on and on and on, and how that leads all the way up to 64 different hexagrams that are all made up of these 8 trigrams. And how that relates to DNA and the I Ching is that there's people that have written these books here, and there's a lot of information online where people have actually decoded genetic code based on the I Ching, or translated through the I Ching, or done it the other way, translated hexagrams and I Ching sequences back through genetic sequences. And then basically these two books here are really about the interconnection between these two ideas, between the I Ching and these 8 trigrams and DNA, which as a modern understanding, we sort of understand that it makes up the physical world. That really it's kind of in some ways like the periodic table of elements, and things are just made up of different combinations or different permutations of these basic fundamental building blocks. Which again, if we want to look at the digital world, if we want to look at the biological world, if we want to look at the psychological world, look at the spiritual world, we can see that in each place, really we're looking at kind of the same logic, kind of the same understanding, because in one instance, genetic information is applicable. In one instance, binary or decimal or Boolean logic is applicable. In another logic, the yin and yang and the Tai Chi symbol and the BaGua and the I Ching, that's applicable in that context. But really at their core, at their root, they all have fundamentally the same basis, fundamentally the same ideas, meaning the binary nature of reality. So at that point, we could go on a lot further, but because it's a YouTube video, I'll leave it relatively succinct. And if you want to learn more, you can definitely check out these books and definitely just read the I Ching and study these things on your own. And going from there, we can look at a couple different questions and ask, well, why is that there's such interconnection or such interrelation between all these supposedly separate aspects? Is it because they all fundamentally came out of the human mind? Or is it something that is fundamentally inherent in reality? Or are both of those things pretty invalid? Is it something that's even greater? Or is it something kind of like in the first Matrix movie, where Neo begins to see in code and then thus rises from the dead and basically has pretty tremendous power and mastery over the Matrix or over the illusory physical world? And is that a metaphor, and does that metaphor translate out into our everyday life? And could the I Ching and understanding the binary nature of reality be sort of a window into doing these kinds of things? Maybe, maybe not. But really the point of that video was just to introduce us to the interconnection and interrelation between the BaGua, the I Ching, binary code, and DNA. So hopefully this video has been helpful and not too boring for all the math and logic stuff. If you have any questions or comments, post them below, and I'll talk to you soon.